Ahoy there! I'm Captain Benzie, and welcome to another lesson of the Catskull Academy, the series that aims to teach you everything you need to know to get the best start possible in EVE Echoes. In today's lesson, we're going to be taking a look at ships. We're going to be doing a complete overview on everything you need to know about the ships that you're going to be flying. Essentially, we're going to undock and have a look at the HUD, the heads-up display, and all of the different numbers and what this means and how you can use that information. We're also going to have a look at the ship tree, so you can have a look at different ships and talk about which ones you might want to fly and get an idea of which route you might choose to progress. We're going to have a look at all of the different stats, all of the different attributes, and kind of give a very brief rundown on what this all means before finally ending up in the ship fitting window and talking about what that is and how that ties it all together. Now, I'm going to be doing this mainly using a Minmatar Rifter, but of course you can follow along with whatever ship you have available from the tutorial at the point when you're having a look at this particular video. A lot of the terms and a lot of the sort of functions and aspects we're going to look at, we're going to literally scratch the surface of. So for example, we'll talk very briefly about capacitor and what it is and how it does, but there will be a future lesson that does a deep dive on capacitor and goes into depth on what it is and how it works. So if there's something in particular you want to see more information on, do stay tuned. Otherwise, with all that said and done, let's first of all jump into the ship tree and have a look at some ship stats. To access the ship tree, tap on your face in the top left. This will open up the main menu, and we are looking for the one that says Ship Tree. It's down here in the bottom right next to Settings. If we tap on that, it'll bring us either to this page, or if we tap on the little arrow in the bottom left, it'll come to the Select Faction page. Now, the sort of 10 factions that are around the outside, so the left-hand side, Interbus, Mordu's Legion, Seven Sisters of Eve, Yunjung, and Or, and on the right-hand side, the Blood Raider Covenant, Angel Cartel, Serpentis Corporation, Ghostus Pirates, and Sanchez Nation, we can kind of ignore those for the purposes of this video. Instead, we're going to be focusing on the 4 here in the center: the Amar Empire, the Galente Federation, the Minmatar Republic, and the Caldari State. Now, of course, depending on which race you chose when you started your character, that will give you a starting point as to which of these 4 you might be interested in having a look at first. Because in the last lesson, we had a look at the Minmatar Republic, that's where I'm going to be showcasing, but this will work for any of the ship trees. Now, when you see a ship tree like this, you can obviously drag this around and have a look and zoom in and zoom out. From left to right are your different tonnages. So this first line on the left here are frigates, followed by destroyers, cruisers, battleships, and here at the very right, on the very end, are your capital ships. You'll also notice these are locked behind tech levels. That's the number down the side here. So we've got like 10 at the top, going all the way down to 1 at the bottom. And you'll notice that not every tech tree has ships available to it. So for example, if you wanted to be flying battle cruisers here, then these are only starting to become available at tech level 7. So you're going to have to wait a while before you get to fly those. And it's tech 9 for battleships and all the way up to tech 10 to fly capitals. But that makes sense. They're big, expensive ships, and you're going to want to understand the game before you consider flying those. Now, obviously, when you started, you would have had your Corvette, and if you tap on the Corvette here, it'll bring up this page, which is the basic info page, and we'll talk more about this in a moment. We can then look up the frigate branch, and you'll see things like, for example, the Slasher, or indeed the Rifter, which is the one we're going to focus on today, and you can see what other ships will unlock at future tech levels. So once you hit tech level 3, you'll gain access to the Probe, you'll gain access to the Breacher, and you'll gain access to the Thrasher, and these will be included in the tutorial as you go through them. And just to jump out briefly, if you went into the Caldari State, for example, then you will have started off flying around in an Ibis, and during the tutorial you'll gain access to both a Condor and to a Merlin. Beyond this, once you hit Tech 3, you'll be able to access the Kestrel, the Heron, and eventually even the Cormorant. Now, this isn't to say that you are stuck with these ships if you are a particular empire. If you rolled Caldari State and you've gone, okay, I've kind of enjoyed these, but actually, having a look at all of this, I quite like the look of the Catalyst here at Tech 3 on the Galente ship tree. Yes, you can fly one of those. You won't get it as part of your tutorial, but if you have enough ISK, you could buy one of these. You could then fly it and so on and so forth. If you literally spent your entire life flying nothing but Caldari ships and then you hit Tech 10, you could decide, right, I've hit Tech 10, I'm going to train into the Moros. It's entirely up to you how you do this. Anyway, let's go back and have a look at the Rifter. Now this is the basic information page, and the first thing to look at here, in the top right under the close button and where it says Rifter, is the little triangle that showcases this as a frigate. Understand that that little triangle means frigate. And you'll notice that in the overview, when you look at things like combat and that, you will notice that they use these icons to show when you've zoomed all the way out as well, what particular ships are where. You then have these two little squiggly symbols. You've got a 2 next to sort of like a triangle. That is 2 high slots. High slots are basically areas that you can put weapons on your ship. And this means the Rifter can have 2 weapons attached to it. The little dash next to that is a low slot symbol, that you can have 3 of these on the Rifter. Low slots tend to be things like support systems, for example, shield tanking and armor tanking modules, propulsion modules, so if you want to go faster you can put those in your low slots and things like that. And there are occasionally mid slots, which are shown with 2 little dashes. If I come out briefly and look at the slasher, you'll see there's 2 little dashes there with a 1. That is a mid slot. A mid slot is a sub weapon, something like a stasis web of fire that you can use to slow down your opponent, or an energy Nosferatu that you can use to leech some of the energy out of their ship. Stuff like that goes in the mid slots. But back to the Rifter for now, let's keep it simple. Now, the can be insured for repairs, ignore that, that is a legacy thing, it doesn't mean anything. We now have ship traits, and the ship traits give you an idea of what this ship is used for and how you might like to fit it. They're not 100% accurate and you can do other things with them, but for now, if we have a look here, you'll see that the symbol on the left here is for cannons, and the symbol on the right is for shields. That means this is a ship that should be fitted with cannons, and if you're going to put tanking modules on it, it's probably best to use shield ones. Ultimately, if you don't like cannons, for example, and you want to use railguns, you can put them on the Rifter, it's possible, it's just not a good idea. And the reason it's not a good idea is if you look at the skill right below here, you can see that the Rifter gets bonuses to small cannon damage. For each level that you have trained in Frigate Command, you will get a 7.5% increase to small cannon damage on any small cannons fitted to this ship, and a 5% increase to small cannon accuracy fall-off. So if you were to put missiles on a Rifter, you're not getting those bonuses. This doesn't affect missiles at all. And so if we jump back to the Caldari ship tree very briefly, this is where things get a little confusing early on as new players. In the Caldari ship tree, you'll see that the Condor here, for example, at the bottom, has small missile torpedo damage, which means that its high slots are probably going to be small missiles or torpedoes, whereas the Merlin, oh look at that, small railgun damage. That means it's probably going to want to use railguns, not missiles, not cannons, not lasers, but railguns. And you can check any of the different ship trees for these as well. So if we go into the Amar ship tree and have a look at the Tormentor, this has small laser damage. So you're probably going to want to put small lasers on that. Again, you could put missiles, but it's pointless. Small lasers are going to do so much better. Right down in the Galente ship tree again, we have the Incursus, and it uses small railguns, and the Atron also uses small railguns. So you can look at these attributes to get an idea of what you should be fitting to that particular ship in terms of its weapons. Back to the Rifter. Now, beyond this, you can see there's no other bonuses here. It's just bonuses to small cannon damage and accuracy fall-off. It recommends shields, but there's no bonus to shields or to armor, which would insinuate you should really use one or the other. We then have some more basic info below this, and I'm going to rattle these off quickly with a brief introduction to what they mean. Overall defense is the amount of damage your ship can take before it is totally destroyed. In this case, the Rifter has 1,302 hit points when they are all gone. Bye-bye Rifter. The flight velocity here is 438 meters per second. Obviously, the higher this is, the faster your ship is capable of moving. Warp speed of 5 astronomical units per second. This, like your flight velocity, is how quickly your ship can move, but when it's warping from point to point. So like when you're moving between systems, that's how fast it can move from gate to gate. Then we have the power grid output. This is essentially how many modules can be fit to your ship, how many modules your ship can power. And that's not 33 modules, that's 33 megawatts. Different modules will have different amounts of power grid requirements. The bigger the module, often the more power grid it will use. Basically, think of these as like hard points. You've got so much power grid that you can use, and all of the modules on your ship combined cannot exceed that, or you can't plug more stuff in. Your capacitors here, 322 gigajoules it says. A capacitor is how your ship runs. This is the heart of your ship. It's its batteries, basically. Whenever you activate pretty much any module in the game, shield modules, armor repairers, afterburners, even some weapons like lasers and railguns, when you activate them, they will use a certain amount of power from your ship's capacitor. And the bigger your ship's capacitor, the more stuff it can have running at once. And it's kind of like a recharging battery, which means whilst you can use it, it will recharge eventually. And the faster it recharges, well, the more stuff you can use without it depleting, if that makes sense. If it recharges quickly and you don't use it much, it's going to stay pretty stable and well charged. Whereas if you've got a whole load of stuff using that power and it recharges slowly, you're going to eventually run out of power. We then have a cargo hold capacity. That's pretty self-explanatory. It's the amount of space the ship has to store cargo and move it around. And then the source radius. This is a bit more advanced, but basically that is how small your ship appears to enemy scanners. So if someone is trying to hunt you down and trying to scan you, that is the kind of size that their scanner needs to be able to detect. We then have shield resistances. This is something that I'll talk about a lot more in a tanking video, and we can ignore it for now. Now, if we tap on Learn More here, it brings us to the full ship detail page. And here you can spend a moment having a look at what your ship might look like with some different skins on it, and just get an idea of how cool this can look. I have the water skin. I quite like how this sort of gets a Kraken sort of look to it at the back there. Bright purple for the Breeze, yellow for the Valkyrie Glory, and you can get these in all kinds of different ways. But for now, let's go back into the attributes and fittings, and this is basically what we've just been looking at, but in more detail. So again, we can now see that, again, we've got the Rifter, power grid output of 33 megawatts, remember that's how much the ship can actually fit to it. We then have the 2 high slots and 3 low slots, cargo hold and defense. Then below the defense, we can see how that's spread out. Now here you can see that the shield has 397 hit points, the armor has 353 hit points, and the structure, which is the bit beneath all of that, has 313 hit points. This is why they recommend that the Rifter be shield tanked, because it has a larger pool of hit points under shield than it does on armor. Armor tanking is another common way, and you would tend to armor tank, use armor defensing, armor repairs and things like that on a ship if its armor is bigger than its shield. But again, there are exceptions to this, but that's a general rule early on. We've then got a bit more detail about our capacitor bank there. You can see we now have a recharge time. It's 172 seconds to go from 0% all the way up to 100%. So if you drain your capacitor and then just leave your ship in 172 seconds, so just under 3 minutes, that will be fully recharged and good to go. Then we have the maximum capacitor recharge rate. That's how fast the capacitor basically can recharge at peak output. So if you have modules that are using so much capacitor per second, and you've got a maximum recharge rate here of 4.68, if your modules are using less than 4.68 gigajoules per second, your capacitor will never run out because it's recharging equal to or faster than it's draining. Whereas if you had, say, modules that are using 6 gigajoules of capacitor, well, the recharge rate is slower than the amount of energy being expended, therefore it will eventually run out. We then have the number of locked targets that the ship can have at maximum. Now, in this case, the Rifter can have a maximum of 3 targets locked at once. Some ships can have 7 or even more, and this will also depend on certain skills. There is a target management skill that will allow you to lock onto additional targets, but you can never lock onto more targets than your ship will allow. Just if you've got a ship that has 7 targets and you've got no target management skills, you might still only be able to lock onto 4 or 5 until you level up that particular skill. Then we have some interesting stats here. Signature radius is how small your ship is. Don't get that confused with source radius. Signature radius is about targeting. It's about when a ship is shooting at you. A lot of this will be covered in videos on how weapons work, like how the turrets work and how missiles work, but for now that is sort of the size that your ship appears onto targeting systems. So enemy cannons, enemy railguns, enemy missiles. This is how small or large your ship appears to those systems, and thus how likely they are to be able to hit you. The smaller this is, theoretically the better. Scan resolution then is how quickly you can lock onto targets. The higher this number, the better your scanners work, and the quicker you can lock onto an enemy target. This actually works together. The smaller something is, the longer it takes to lock on. The larger it is, the easier it is to lock onto. The higher your scan resolution, the quicker you can lock onto other targets. The lower your scan resolution, the slower it's going to take. So if you've got a high scan resolution, you're going to lock onto things quickly. Low scan resolution, it's going to take you a long time to lock on, and if the target that you're locking onto has a large signature radius, you're going to lock onto it faster than a target that has a small signature radius. It'll just take longer to lock on. Then we have our flight velocity and our warp speed, which we've already talked about, followed by mass and inertia. Now, these are really interesting stats that you can pretty much do an entire lesson on their own, so I'm not going to spend too long on them now, but to basically explain, mass is obviously how massive your ship is, how much it weighs, for want of a better phrase, how many kilograms of mass your ship is. Now, the more massive a ship is, the slower it will accelerate, the longer it'll take to decelerate and to turn and things like that. So a high mass ship is a bit more cumbersome. But then you have an inertia modifier, and this is basically a special number that modifies that mass and gives you an agility rating. Now, the basics of this is that if you take your mass and multiply it by the inertia modifier, that is your agility rating. If you then look at another ship that has a different mass and a different inertia modifier, you can then multiply those mass and inertia together to get that ship's agility rating, and then you can compare the two. And the higher the number, ultimately, the better. It's going to give you a faster, more agile ship. So that way you can compare a couple of different ships. They might have the same mass, but a different inertia modifier. They might have the same inertia modifier, but very different masses. It means that some ships bigger than a frigate can actually move almost as if they were. There are some cruisers and even battle cruisers that move as fast as destroyers, thanks to a mass and inertia modifier combination. Again, we're not going to focus on that too much for this video, but that's a basic breakdown of it there. Finally then, we have the trait description. This again is just having a look at the traits of this particular ship. In this case, Frigate Command is the skill that if we train, we get bonuses to the Rifter. Now that means that if you're looking at flying the Rifter, you can see it says Frigate Command. If we go into skills and we look for Frigate Command, there it is. You want to train that to level 5. Now the skill itself is going to give you a reduction to your inertia modifier, which, remember, means you're going to be able to move a little bit more agilely. It's going to give you a better agility rating, and then you have a frigate flight velocity bonus of plus 25%. That's just for training the skill. As you can see, I have that skill trained to 5. That means I get a full training here of Frigate Command bonus. I would have, rather than just a 5% small cannon accuracy fall off, because I've got 5 levels, that's going to be a 25% small cannon accuracy fall off. Rather than just 7.5% small cannon damage, because I've got all 5 possible levels in Frigate Command, that means I will actually get a 37.5% increase to small cannon damage. Now, it's worth noting that, of course, yes, the Frigate Command does also have Advanced and Expert level. These, if you train into these, you'll still get that bonus. So you see here, the level 5 Advanced Frigate Command gives me another 10% inertia modifier reduction and another 10% flight velocity. Also notice it's a lot smaller than the basic level. The basic level gives you the most benefit for the smallest amount of skills. It's still worth trading into these if you like frigates, by the way, but the Advanced Frigate Command skill will not affect the Rifter's bonuses. You'll still get the bonuses to the inertia modifier from the skill, but that Frigate Command bonus caps at 5. It's not Advanced Frigate Command. If I jump back into the ship tree briefly and scroll up to, for example, that's a bad example, the Slasher Interceptor, You see here the Slasher Interceptor has bonuses from Advanced Frigate Command. Now that means that the standard Frigate Command skill trained to 5 won't do anything. If you have Frigate Command 5 and you're flying a Slasher Interceptor, you will not get any of that small cannon damage. That 10% small cannon damage is per level of Advanced small cannon damage. So if you then train Advanced Frigate Command to 5, you'd get a 50% small cannon damage boost there. And so that's basically how you read through the ship details there. This will give you an idea of what this ship can do and how it compares. And speaking of comparisons, once you're on the tree here, you can actually tap on Add Comparisons, and you see it now appears here on the left-hand side, which we can open and close. We can then open, for example, the Slasher, add that to comparisons, and now we can see the two ships side by side, so we can look at how they compare. So the Rifter has 2 high slots and 3 low slots, whereas the Slasher has 2 high slots, 1 mid slot, but only 2 low slots, so it gets 1 fewer low slot, but an additional mid slot. You can look at things like the damage here. So a Rifter gets 7.5% small cannon damage per level of Frigate Command, whereas the Slasher only gets a 5% increase to small cannon damage. So that's 37.5 on the Rifter, 25% on the Slasher. So you see that the Slasher doesn't do as much damage as the Rifter, but if we look down here, you'll see its flight velocity is a lot faster on the Slasher. It's also got a better warp speed. The power grid is pretty much the same as other capacitors, cargo's a little bit smaller, but the source radius is also smaller, and so you can have a look and see how those two ships compare. And this does also mean you could go with the Rifter, add that to comparisons, then we're going to move across to the Caldari State and compare that to, for example, the Merlin. How do these two ships compare? Well, you can see here that the Rifter gets a 7.5% increase to small cannon damage, whereas the Merlin gets a 7.5 increase to small railgun damage. Again, obviously the Merlin is a railgun ship. They've got the same fitting profile of 2 highs and 3 lows, and we can look at how they compare, like defensively, in regards to flight velocity, warp speed, and you might look at this and say, well, okay, the Rifter's a lot faster, and it's got better overall defense. What's the point in the Merlin? Well, the Merlin's also got bigger power grid, it's got better capacitors, slightly bigger cargo hold, and of course it uses railguns. So if you like railguns, then the Merlin is going to be a better ship for you forever compared to the Rifter. And so that's how we use the ship tree to have a look at the different ships that you might like to fly. It's also worth noting that if, for example, going back to the Rifter, if we move back to the Minmatar Republic tree here and go down, we'll add this to comparisons. Remember, the Rifter has small cannon bonuses there. Now, it's also got bonuses for Frigate Command, but you're probably going to be training small cannon skills. That means if we come across into the Thrasher, we can now compare this side by side and see that, oh, I've been training small cannon operation because I was flying the Rifter, I want to fly some other stuff that uses cannons. Actually, that translates nicely to the Thrasher because I'm going to be getting that bonus there. Same with Destroyer Command. So if you like your frigates, obviously you've seen there that the Slasher gets bonuses from Frigate Command, the Rifter gets bonuses from Frigate Command, the Breacher gets bonuses from Frigate Command. That means Frigate Command is probably a useful skill for you to train into, and hopefully that makes sense. Alright, so let's see how this all ties together on the fitting page. Now, to access the fitting page, you tap on your face, and then it's here in the top left, Fitting. This is basically where you manage all of the different modules on your ship, and it's essentially sort of a live update version of the info page we've just looked at. Now, if I tap where it says Minmatar Rifter here on the left, it brings up that basic info page again, so we can have a look at what is sort of going on here. You can go, oh, what was it that it got bonuses to? That's right, small cannon damage, small cannon accuracy fall off. Cool, I've got that information. Then we can go into the high slots and we can tap onto these here with a single tap, and we can change these. If, for example, I fancied instead using Republic Fleet small autocannons, we can fit a couple of these instead of the Republic Fleet strike cannons that I had fitted previously. And when we see now here at the top right, we have our offense, DPS, damage per second, 137.95. Autocannons are fast firing, they're short range, but they put out a decent amount of damage per second, in this case 137.95. Remember, I have better skills than you do at the time you're watching this video, and I'm using higher level loot. So if your number looks a lot lower here, don't worry, you'll get there eventually. Now, ultimately you can change the high slots to anything you like. If I wanted to, I could put decomposers or missiles or whatever here. If I go to put a Gallows small missile launcher, you'll see the game doesn't stop me doing it. Just my damage goes right down because it's not a good weapon for me to use. So instead, I'm going to go back into here and we're going to change this to Republic Fleet Small Strike Cannons. Now, strike cannons look like they've got lower DPS than autocannons. They do have lower DPS, lower damage per second, but strike cannons' advantage is that they do a lot of damage per hit. There's just a long time between the two hits, so you do more damage per shot, just fewer shots overall. They're also a lot longer range, but again, this is something we'll talk about in future videos. In the low slots, you can see I've gone for a shield booster, a gyro stabilizer, and an afterburner. These are the kinds of things you can put in the low slots to modify what your ship can do. We're not worried too much about what kind of things you would want to put into these slots, but to get an idea, if you tap on the little clipboard icon here in the top left under fitting, you can go to recommended fittings. Now this is very, very basic. These are just a starting point. They're not necessarily the best gear that you can put on, but it gives you an idea of what could work well on this ship. In this case, you can see that the Rifter here, it's suggesting 2 Mark 1 small strike cannons for its high slots, and then the low slots, a small afterburner, a small shield booster, and a gyro stabilizer. And oh, would you look at that? That's basically what I've gone for. I've just gone for higher quality versions of that gear. And whilst you're on that recommended fittings, you can actually hit apply. And if you have those modules already in your in the station that you're docked at, it will automatically fit those. I don't have those particular low-level modules, so I'm not going to do that. But looking on the right-hand side of the screen here now, first of all, as I said, we've already got the offense. That shows us how much damage per second we're going to do. Annoyingly, it does not show us what our alpha strike is. That's the amount of damage we do per shot, and I would really like to see that added. Maybe at the time of you watching this video that has been added. If so, awesome, thank you NetEase. We can then tap where it says defense, and this will close down the offense menu and bring up defense. This then explains to us how much HP we have overall, how many hit points are on the ship, in this case 1,912. But hang on a second, Benzie, didn't it say 1,302 earlier? Well, yes it did, but remember, I've got skills, and when we go into something like maintenance technology and defense upgrade, there's frigate defense upgrade, and by training this, you get more HP on your frigates. Anyway, it'll then tell us how many shield hit points we have there, 586, and then the different resistances. Remember, the higher this number, the less damage you take from that type. So if your shields are being shot at, and they're using explosive damage, then 50% of that damage is going to be resisted. If they shoot me with a shot that does 100 explosive damage, and it hits my shields are actually only going to take 50 damage. However, if they're shooting at me with a weapon that does, say, 100 EM, electromagnetic damage, then I'm only going to resist 10% of that, so 90 damage is going to go through, and that's going to really hurt my shields. We can then tap on armor, and we can tap on hull to have a look at these as well. The game often calls this structure, but it's often referred to as hull as well. Essentially, shields are the outermost thing of your ship. It's like an electromagnetic field. Once that's depleted, you'll start taking damage on your armor. Then once your armor has taken full damage, you'll start to take damage onto your structure. And when your structure is fully depleted, that's when your ship goes bye-bye. 457 structure hit points, 518 on armor, 586 on shield. Remember, the game suggested that the Rifter might be shield tanked, and that's kind of what we're getting at here. We then have the capacitor menu. This shows us how long, if everything is switched on and active, how long it's going to take for our capacitor to go from 100% down to 0%. Now that's because things like, for example, the shield booster here, this uses a lot of capacitor. As you can see here, activation cost is 27.11 gigajoules, and it's an activation time of 3.11 seconds. So basically, that shield booster alone is going to take 27 gigajoules of capacitor every 3 seconds. And hang on, the Rifter, if we go back into its full information here, its maximum recharge rate is only 4.68, which means that shield booster is going to be using capacitor a lot faster than we can charge it. So don't leave the shield booster running, turn it on when you need it, and remember to turn it off afterwards in order to save energy. Again, you can see capacitor capacity there, 483, recharge time 172 seconds under ideal conditions, and you can see there capacitor recharge rate minus 4.2 gigajoules per second, minus 58.6%. That is how fast we're going to be draining. It's very fast drain. If we go to targeting, you can see our signature radius. Remember, the smaller the signature radius of the ship, the longer it takes you to be locked onto. We then have our scan resolution, 738, that's how quickly I can lock onto other ships. Source radius is how I can be scanned, and maximum lock targets is how many targets I can lock onto at maximum. Finally then, we have the navigation panel at the bottom. This will tell us how fast we go as standard, 635.1. That's obviously before we activate the afterburner, which makes us run faster. We then have a warp speed of 5.0. Warp stability we'll talk about in a future video, but basically if that goes below 0, then you can't warp. It needs to be 0 or higher, which it should be for every ship as standard. Then finally, you have a warp preparation time of 1.46 seconds. That means from stationary, how long does it take between you tapping warp 2 for the ship to actually warp? 1.46 seconds in this case. So that's your fitting panel. Finally, let's undock and just showcase a few final details. Here we are in space then, just outside the Catskull Academy itself, and you'll see that all of my modules are here in the bottom right, so all of the different weapons and that I fitted. You can see my afterburner here, you can see I've got my 2 strike cannons, 1, 2, I've got my gyro stabilizer, and my shield booster, and you might not like the way that those are laid out, at which point you can kind of just drag them around and do all kinds of stuff there. In fact, with weapons, as long as they are the same type, in this case I've got Republic Fleet strike cannons, I can actually drag them over each other and stack them. And I like doing that because it means I can kind of just put stuff around here, and I know I'm kind of hiding that in the corner there, but I've now got my afterburner in the bottom right, my weapons I can just tap there and it'll activate both cannons at once. I can activate my shield booster by tapping here, and of course my gyro stabilizer. What I want to draw your attention to, though, is in the center of the screen here. This is your heads-up display, and there are some bars on here that we're going to discuss. Now, on the very left-hand side here, where you see me tapping, that is basically where our, like all of our different defenses. The bar on the left-hand side is shield, the bar in the middle is your armor, and the bar closest to the center, the small one, is your hull. Now, before your armor starts taking damage, you will have to lose all of your shield, and then your armor will completely go away, and then you start taking damage to your hull. Now, this bar on this side is your capacitor, this orange bar. You can see it's full at the moment, but if I activate the shield booster, you'll see I start to consume capacitor. And every time my shield booster activates, my capacitor goes down a little bit further. So let's also activate the afterburner, and let's use the gyro stabilizer as well, and oh look, we're down below 50% capacitor already. Now obviously if I were then to turn everything off, eventually that capacitor will slowly restart charging. You see it's now about 50% and it's going to go higher and higher and higher, gradually as it recharges. Finally then, you've got the blue bar at the bottom. This is your speed and your velocity. If I were to tap on the ship and hit stop, you'll see that the blue bar goes down as my ship stops. Then if I turn around and I move back towards the Catskull Academy itself, that will go up there, and it goes up to its maximum speed. And I can then activate my afterburner to go faster if I wanted, but if we long press on this, you can get a nice little attribute info screen pop up. 585 shield, 517 armor, 456 structure, those are my hit points. It shows where my capacitor is currently and the rate at which I'm moving. So for example, if I activate the afterburner and then bring that back up, you see my maximum speed has massively shot up. 1,619 meters per second, but I'm now chewing my capacitor. That's going, well, it's actually still recharging. Let's activate the shield booster. And there we are. You see the capacitor is now going to be going down because that shield booster and the afterburner combined are using capacitor faster than my capacitor can recharge. Now, there's more to all of this user interface. Like, we can talk about your different speed settings here, we can talk about the overview, but that's all stuff that we're going to cover in future lessons. For today's lesson, I just wanted to talk about how to look at ship stats and understand what they all mean. So hopefully that's given you some information and some understanding of what all of this means, how this all goes together, to give you an idea of what a particular ship in Eve Echoes can do. And I don't want to call it homework, but I would recommend that having watched this video, you have a look at the stat screens of the ships that you are flying. And if you want to have a look at the stat screen of a ship that you yourself are flying, you can open your inventory and you can have a look at them by long pressing on them in your hangar, and that will bring up some menus there. Or of course you can go in via the ship tree and have a look there. Heck, even have a look at some of the bigger ships that are available much later in the game and see how they compare, just to get an idea of what all of those different stats do. Anyway, folks, thank you very much for watching this one right the way to the end. If you do have any questions about today's lesson, drop them into the comment section down below. Either myself or someone else will be able to give you some cohesive answers. Come join us on the Catskull Discord, which is linked in the description of this video as well. There's a whole bunch of folk there who love nothing more than helping out new players and explaining how this game works, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions myself. If I'm not available though, there are a whole bunch of other folks as well there willing to help. Anyway, good luck, let me know how you get on, stay tuned to make sure that you don't miss out on the next lesson, because in the next lesson we're going to be looking at basic navigation, how to move your ship around, how to go from A to B, how to move between systems, and how to set autopilots and things like that. There's a lot of interesting stuff to cover in that video, so stay tuned, happy sailing, and see you in New Eden.